Welcome to Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation possible. You will get to hear from CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve process challenges and how they've earned success in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, you will enjoy the insights these industry professionals bring to this podcast. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lisa Richter, the host of Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation and processing possible. In today's episode, we're talking industrial automation with Bob Vavra, who is Senior Content Director for Machine Design and Power and Motion, both published by Endeavor Business Media. Bob has a long career in publishing, media, and events. He earned his degree in mass communications and then embarked on a newspaper career. After switching to trade publishing, Bob has been an editor and publisher and has spent the last 18 years covering the manufacturing sector. He joined Machine Design and Power and Motion in 2019. Bob is a sought-after webcast moderator and event emcee and has presided over events in the US, Germany, and China. Bob's other claim to fame? He's a past Jeopardy contestant. Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to be here.
So let's start out with that. You have to tell that story. It's not in the script here, but I got to hear about that.
Well, the only thing I ever wanted to do in my whole life was be on Jeopardy. And I got the opportunity about 20 years ago. And it was a tremendous amount of fun. People ask me how I did, and I tell them I finished in the top 3 that day. It was a great experience. It was a lot of fun. I had to realign my entire life goals after appearing on the show. It's a great experience. It's a great goal to have had, and it's a great goal to have achieved in my life. And it's also a great conversation starter at parties or on the occasional podcast.
I'm always curious to understand how once you get in front of the cameras and the lights, like even if you're really great at doing it, I would imagine once you get in front of the camera and the lights, it takes it to a whole nother level. And now you're nervous on that front, or like, what was that experience?
The funny thing about it is that the one thing that most people are afraid of, they say even more than death, is public speaking. That's never been a problem for me. I've never had a problem getting up in front of an audience. And so in this experience, it was one of those things where I was comfortable doing that part of it. But as I think back to the testing to get on the show, one of the things that they do is they give you a test to make sure you've got the basic knowledge, but they also do kind of a mock game because it is a television show. You do want to have people who have at least a passing personality. Apparently, I have a passing personality. So it worked out fine. I was able to get on the show. And as I said, just a tremendous personal thrill and something I look back on very fondly.
Was Alex Trebek the host at that time?
Oh, yeah. Alex was still the host. And one of the interesting things people ask about some of the trivia around the show, we never get to see Alex except for when he's on the set running the game, because they don't want anybody who knows the questions to have any contact with the contestants. So that part of the business is very separate from one another. I have a photo of myself and Alex sitting up on my back wall back there, and it's a very cherished memento. I also have a video of the event, but it was just a lot of fun. Everybody was so nice. It's indicative of how well they do the show that I'm still blithering like an idiot about it 20 years later. So
yeah, I have a friend who's been on the show. She's been on several game shows, actually. And she says that too, that it was just a really great bonding experience. The people were really great. And so I believe you. Let's get back to the script then. Tell us why you chose a career in journalism, particularly in the industrial genre.
Well, I'd say in both cases, it chose me. I'm one of those kids when he was 8 or 9 years old who got to be exactly what he wanted to be when he grew up. I started out as a sportswriter in the Chicago area for local newspapers, moved into news, moved into editor roles, moved into some other kind of management roles within newspapers. And as I was looking for the next cool thing to do, I stumbled upon trade publishing. I had no idea this world existed. And I went to my first trade event and I'm going, what do I know about, at that time I was covering retail petroleum. What do I know about this? And I learned very early on that it was a community, just like community newspapers that I'd been working at for 25 years. the community is simply defined by what you're interested in rather than where you live. And once I understood that, it's really been kind of the formation for everything else that I do. I report about the community of manufacturing. And as opportunities have come along, I've learned an enormous amount. I've learned about 0.1% of what I would need to know to run a manufacturing facility. But I know enough to ask good questions, and I know enough to find smart people. And that's really the kind of the crux of what my job is today, is working with my team and working with our organization to tell good stories.
How do you describe to lay people what you do?
I go back to the storytelling idea. I tell people, look, I'm not an engineer. I said, the only screwdriver I'm allowed to handle at home is vodka in it. So I am not the person that you want on the engineering side of this. What I do is I find really smart people. I give them a forum and I get out of their way and let them communicate. My job is to be the conduit between the people who have the information and the people who need the information. And if I have a skill set, that's where it is, in the ability to help the people who are telling the stories tell it as effectively as possible through our channel to get it out to the audience. And hopefully everybody benefits from that process.
A little bit of history of Endeavor Business Media and how has it evolved?
It's been an interesting ride because I joined Machine Design about 5 months before Endeavor Business Media acquired Machine Design and a number of the other Informa manufacturing and industrial titles. Endeavor is only about 3 or 4 years old right now. It has spent the last 3 years really acquiring some tremendous properties in a wide range of business-to-business media. At a time when a lot of business-to-business media companies are getting smaller, we're getting larger, we're getting more integrated, we're doing a number of things. And that's because our senior management team are B2B publishers. They're not venture capitalists. They're people who understand what it takes to run a really strong business media company in the 21st century. They've gone about acquiring all of these great properties from Informa, from Penwell, from a number of other publishing groups. And now we're learning what we can do individually under the Endeavor umbrella, but also what we can all do collectively together. And those possibilities are really exciting.
And when we talk about the digital transformation, nowhere has it been more explosive than in journalism. You can see it all in your commute from your local newspaper all the way to the trade press. That's just been completely disruptive. I would say starting, I want to say maybe even 15 years ago, they've really struggled to find their footing and keep a business model that makes sense and all that good stuff. So many publications have had to rethink their business models and revenue streams. What do you expect for your company in the next 12 to 24 months?
I think we've already made a lot of the investments in the technology. At the end of the day, that's different from manufacturing. It's investing in technology, it's investing in people, and it's investing in processes. So that's what we've really been working on. The biggest change for me, I'm a dinosaur in this business. I've been doing this. Next month, it will be, I hate to use the number, 48 years I've been in publishing. When I was in local newspapers, it was week to week. When I started in trade publishing, it was month to month. Now it's minute to minute. We get information out to our audience very quickly. The thing that's changed is the number of channels we have to talk to. We do webinars, we do magazines, we do websites, we have digital editions, we do live events, and there's all kinds of different ways we can touch the audience. The key thing that has changed in our business is that the consumers now are choosing the way they want to receive the information. If they want a print magazine, we have a really, really good one, and it continues to go out to them in the same format they've always known it. If they are more digitally inclined, we have a digital edition of the magazine. We also have the website. If they are like to get newsletters, we've got that information, and it leads you back to all the other information that's available. The other big change for us has been that we are now a global publication. About more than half of our web traffic comes from outside the US, and that's because the rest of the world is looking for information and solutions. They're typing that into their favorite search engines. Our articles are coming up. So we get a tremendous amount of traffic from the ability to search for our articles based on what you're interested in, the topic area. And it's been a really interesting thing. I'm in 160 countries a month, according to my analytics. It's an amazing thing to think about, but it's also a great responsibility. We want to try and get information that's valuable across the board. Fortunately for us, The laws of physics are the same everywhere in the world. The rules of manufacturing generally apply everywhere. The biggest differences for us is what kinds of things does everybody have in common, and try and share those ideas and share those common solutions, because a plant in Boston or Berlin or Bahrain, they all run pretty much the same. We're trying to get as much good information about how to do that better. And that also is a universal concept.
Hi, Jose.
Hi, Lisa.
Hey, you want to play a game?
I really can't. I'm working on the strategy, the budget.
Oh, come on. It's conference related.
Well, okay, but make it quick.
We're going to play two truths and a lie.
How is this conference related?
You'll see. I'm going to say three statements and then you guess which one is the lie. Ready? Here we go. 1. Locals call the iconic blue Mustang sculpture at Denver International Airport Lucifer. 2. Early settler and pioneer William Agah named streets after both his wife and his mistress. 3. The 1976 Winter Olympics were held in Denver. Which one's the lie?
Without the benefit of a Google, I will say number 3. The Winter Olympics were held in Denver.
You're right. The answer is number 3. In 1970, Denver was selected to host the 1976 Winter Olympics, but in 1972, Colorado voters struck down the ballot initiatives allocating funds to pay for the games, so they were moved to Austria.
Well, okay, but if we are promoting the conference, it might be better to talk about how Denver has 300 days of sunshine, the largest city park system in the nation, and brews more beer than any other city in America.
No way.
Don't say it.
Fine. Why don't you tell the good people where they can go to learn about the CSIA Executive Conference in Denver in June?
All the conference details can be found on our website at www.controlsys.org/conference 2022.
And we promise to have better material, right, Jose?
Definitely.
So tell me a little bit more about your readers. What kind of job titles they have? You mentioned that it's quite a global audience, but what other sweeping generalizations can you make about your audience?
We've done a lot of research in this area. The overwhelming majority are men. We have an initiative with machine design and our design and engineering group called Women in Science and Engineering, or WISE, and we're working on trying to highlight and celebrate what I've told my staff very clearly is not women engineers, but engineers who are women. And that distinction for me is very important. We want to talk about engineering first. I think, though, as a broader group, their one common thing is that they're always looking to get better. And it doesn't really matter if you've got a 20-person operation or a 2,000-person operation. Your goal is to get incrementally better all the time. So we talk about the technologies that allow that to happen, as well as the strategies that allow that to happen, because the two have to run in parallel to one another. You can't just, as I think we're going to talk about with automation, you can't just drop an automation system into a plant and expect everything to be better. There is a process by which automation succeeds, and we want to talk about the process as much as the technology.
What are your favorite kinds of stories to do?
Oh, it's been impossible during the pandemic, but I love getting out into the plants and kicking the tires and meeting the staff and talking about their specific problems. The best stories are the ones that take all of these concepts out of the abstract and put them into practical solutions. And I know we've worked very closely with CSIA over the years to try and find as many of those stories as we possibly can and to tell them as effectively as we can. I think one of the best parts of this is when one of my readers can see themselves in the story that we're telling. And that I see that guy's problem. I understand what he's trying to deal with. And I want to know how he succeeded so that I can take that information back to my team so that I can succeed. I think the other thing that our readers have in common is that they're at the core of the operational and design elements of a manufacturing facility, but they need to be able to talk up to the C-suite and be able to say to them, I think this solution will work. So we have to talk a lot about ROI. We have to talk a lot about how these things get done and where the cost benefits are. It's not always in easy to see. And it's sometimes things that you have to be a little more patient on. And that's a difficult conversation to have with your chief financial officer. So we try to arm the readers with as much of that information. What's the ROI on a given solution? What do we have to do from a training standpoint? What do we have to do from a staffing standpoint? If we put all those ideas together, eventually we'll have a pretty clear picture so that they're at least well armed to go forward and have those discussions.
What advice do you give to engineers who hate to write, and we know there are a lot of them, but want to be published? I feel like there's a Dorothy Parker quote in there somewhere.
There actually is, but it's the best thing I ever read about my profession. I read it a long time ago when I was in the newspaper industry, and I've carried it with me ever since. And that is that what we need are not better writers. What we need are better reporters. If we start with the basic information and we work on it and we have the right thing that we want to tell the audience, my team's job is to turn that into prose that flows well and is grammatically correct, is functionally correct. Those are all the things that editors do. I'd rather have a bunch of scribbled notes from an engineer and put them together into a more attractive package at the end. I don't expect everybody to be able to write. I used to think everybody could write, and I was amazed when I was about 10 years old that everybody couldn't. That's the one thing that I do well in this world is I put words together well. I don't expect everybody to do that. I certainly couldn't go in and do their jobs. So I think there's too much pressure that we put on engineers to write great. What we need to have is great information, great insight, great knowledge. The rest will come from there. I also think that at the end of the day, if you talk to these guys, they know what they're talking about and they like the opportunity to talk about it. They're just worried about how it's all going to come out in the end. We spend a lot of time working with those kinds of articles, and we want to make sure that if somebody gives us their time and their knowledge, that they are well represented and well reflected when we give that information out to our audience.
I think the Dorothy Parker quote I was thinking of is, I hate writing, but love having written.
Yes. Yeah.
Something like that.
There are days that writing, like anything else, is a bit of a slog. But once I sit down, my writing process is, walking around, thinking about it a little bit. And then when I sit down, it usually just everything except that part of my brain gets put on autopilot and I just write. And it's writing and then putting it away and then coming back to it and say, oh, this could be better, or I didn't explain myself well here, or oh, is that how you spell that word? The writing process is different in that sense, but it's very much the same. It's trying to get everything out of your head and down onto the screen or onto the paper.
Oh, I'm a huge fan of the crappy first draft.
Yeah.
Just put it down and we can figure it out later for sure.
I've said for years, people think that publishing is this, sacred process where articles are lovingly carried on silk pillows from place to place. And it's this surreal kind of process. It's very much like seeing a hot dog being made, but hot dogs are delicious, particularly if they're prepared properly. So the analogy is a good one, I think, because I think we want to spend our time worrying about how people see it at the end of the process because they don't know a lot of the things that went on in the background. It's like that with any manufactured product. And at the end of the day, a magazine is a manufactured product.
Challenges that your readers facing right now?
Well, there have been one or two over the past couple of years. I think the biggest challenge that I see in the industry right now is integrating the technologies effectively, integrating them alongside your people, integrating them alongside other technologies, getting them scaled properly. You see some of these projects and they seem like they're only applicable to 5,000 worker plants or billion-dollar manufacturing facilities. I think one of the things we try to talk a lot about is that small to mid-sized manufacturer, the scalability of the automation technology that's available today. So we spend a lot of time really trying to focus in on that group because that's where most of the manufacturing is done. That's where most of the value is created in the manufacturing space. They tend to be risk averse, but if you can show value in the risk, they won't go through 9 layers of management to make a decision. They'll get on it very quickly.
What trends are you seeing in industrial automation right now?
We're starting to see people better understanding and more comfortable with the technology. Some of this was force-fed. There were decisions made over the last 2 years during the pandemic that were made out of a combination of no other choice and desperation. And we've integrated a lot of robots. We've integrated a lot of systems. And now we're able to kind of step back and say, okay, now what did we do? And how do we optimize it? How do we get better at it? It solved a specific problem at this point in time, and we had to spend the money to do it. But now we want to take a step back and say, okay, what did we do? Why did we do it? And now what can we do better with this? Is it optimizing the robots we have? Is it optimizing the automation we have? Or is it adding to that? Is it figuring out, well, we were able to get through this period with 2 or 3 fewer people. We're not able to hire 2 or 3 fewer people right now. Maybe we can roll this out into other areas of the organization. I think they're trying to find that balance between automation, robotics, and people. And it's a very individualized discussion. There's not a cookie cutter solution out there. CSIA knows that better than anybody because there isn't a single system integration solution that works for everybody. It's very customized. And so that's what the challenge for your membership as well as our audience is to how do I take all of this and find something that works for me?
Expanding on that a little bit, what do you think the biggest challenges facing the automation marketplace today and in the future?
I think it's a few things. One is dealing with the data, effectively dealing with all of these data points that have been collected. They're now being organized better. They're now being distributed better, but we still haven't gotten anywhere near where we need to be from an automation data standpoint to get what I've said is the right information to the right person at the right time in the right context. The purchasing department doesn't need to know how many pieces you produced that day. They just need to know where to send the invoice. By the same token, the person on the line needs to know what's available in terms of additional parts coming in so that they can finish all the things that they need to do. Data needs to be very personalized and it needs to be very democratic. It needs to be spread across the manufacturing facility in a very effective way. I think we're coming to grips with a more robotic environment to use our people to their greatest advantage. If we have fewer people, if we're going to have fewer people, then how do we take the greatest advantage of what they do well and leave some of the other work, the more dangerous, the more backbreaking, the more routine or mundane work, and give that to a robotic cell and use the people as effectively as they possibly can. And I think that we're going to have a day of reckoning around the idea of, are we a global manufacturer or are we a regional one? Are we a local one? The supply chain disruptions, some of them are real, some of them have been man-made. All of them are affecting and changing the way we are looking at how we source and manufacture in our environment. If you're a global manufacturer, you still need local sourcing. How much product gets moved across oceans these days is one of the big discussion points that's still coming. And how much is available and what's the most cost-effective way to do it? We saw some of this after the recession in 2008 and 2009. We're seeing more of it today. And it's a great discussion to have. It's not a simple solution. It's not about offshoring or onshoring or reshoring. It's a term I've always used called right shoring, getting the materials you need to do your manufacturing operations as efficiently and effectively as possible when you need them.
What makes you optimistic about the future of the automation industry?
First of all, how far it's come in such a short period of time. I think manufacturing as a whole has been so adaptable during the pandemic. Remember how much product and how many new products we had to create literally and figuratively out of whole cloth in the shortest period of time possible. We used technologies that had never really been used before, including artificial intelligence, including machine learning, that are just up and coming concepts in the industry. Look how aggressively manufacturers met the challenge and solved problems on the fly. I think the challenge to the industry now is don't stop. Let's continue to innovate at speed because the pace of change has accelerated dramatically. And it didn't just start with the pandemic, but over the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen a tremendous amount of change, But those changes were theoretical. Those changes were suppliers coming up with solutions. It wasn't necessarily manufacturers rushing behind to adopt those solutions. During the pandemic, that's exactly what happened. And now it's one step further than that. Now, how do we continue to bring along those people who still need to modernize their facilities, as well as accelerate the kind of growth that we've seen? The one thing I know for sure is that if you are not embracing things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and data management and IoT today, and you're not getting ready to do that over the next 5 years, you're going to find yourself in a competitively disadvantaged position. And that is going to make it difficult for you to continue to be part of, whether it's a national or a global manufacturing environment, it doesn't matter. You're going to have to be using data, and you're going to have to be using machine learning, and you're going to have to be using robotics efficiently and effectively, because it's going to be a competitive advantage for everybody else.
As a podcast listener, you know that podcasts are, well, they're having a kind of a moment. And while the Talking Industrial Automation podcast is no crime junkie, it does have more than 93,000 downloads since inception in 2018. In fact, it's very typical that an episode gets 1,000 downloads within weeks of dropping, numbers that only the top 5 to 10% of podcasts attain, according to Buzzsprout data. Why am I telling you all this? Because I want you to be able to tap into this audience by purchasing a 60-second spot. If you are looking to fill your pipeline of talent, for instance, what better way to show the younger demographic that you are an innovative company willing to meet your audience where they are? Or maybe you're launching a product or service, or just have something to say. The Talking Industrial Automation podcast is the place to do it. Contact me, Lisa Richter, at podcast@controlsys.org. As the saying goes, let me help you. Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about Endeavor Media's relationship with CSIA. I don't know if our listeners really truly understand how we work together, so could you take a minute just to explain that, please?
Sure. And I preface this by saying that I've been working with CSIA on a number of fronts and with other magazine groups over the last decade, and it's been a very collaborative relationship. We host the CSIA Exchange on our machine design website. That's a great asset for our audience who are looking to reach out to a system integrator. I think my approach to CSIA is that the system integrator is unbelievably valuable to what's going on in manufacturing. We talked about the small to mid-sized manufacturers earlier, and one of the most important things is that they don't have the size or the staff or the bandwidth to be able to have an integrator on staff all the time. For GM, sure, they've got integrators within their organization. A small to mid-sized manufacturer can't do that. It's just not feasible, because they may do an integration project and wait 12 to 18 months to do another one. Where the integrator comes in is with a tremendous amount of expertise, broad expertise in the industry, as well as the ability to synthesize those types of solutions to a customized solution for a given manufacturer. So I think the integrators are tremendously valuable in helping to advance automation on a very broad basis, but more importantly, bring very customized and very focused solutions to a lot of small to mid-sized manufacturers. That's a concept that I want to support, that Endeavor wants to support. And so that's the core of the relationship that I want to continue to foster with CSIA and its members.
If you're a system integrator and you're a member of CSIA, what do you see as the benefit to that system integrator that CSIA has this relationship with Endeavor Media and the trade publications?
I think it's an ability to, number one, be a thought leader, to talk about what your people do. Companies are seen as big things. The integrators who are on the ground doing their job are tremendously valuable. They have a tremendous amount of tribal knowledge, but they can talk about how to help everybody solve those kinds of problems. I think integrators would want to be celebrating their people as often as possible, under as many different forms as possible. I know there's a System Integrator of the Year award that is handed out every year. Those kinds of recognitions, very, very important. But I think it's important to be able to hold up your people as good examples of what happens when an integrator does his job very, very well. And so I think that's where, if you have a story to tell, we'd love to tell it, because we think it's, as I said at the outset, the role of the integrator is integral to the growth of automation, to the growth of robotics, to the growth of manufacturing in this country over the next decade. And frankly, I'm honored to be working with CSIA because I think there's so much value to what the association does and its members do on a continuing basis. I've had a lot of conversations with CSIA members over the year, and I've never failed to learn something.
I think, too, when people hear this term thought leader, or they think of themselves being published in a publication or whatever, it can be a little maybe intimidating. And they think, oh, little old me. Nobody wants to hear from little old me. They also tend to be kind of more on the humble side. It feels very uncomfortable talking about that. Speak a little bit to that barrier that we encounter.
The thing that I run into a lot is people not being able to talk about projects that they've done because there's disclosure issues. And I understand that. And I ask for 100 of these stories a year. I get 6. But those are the 6 that wind up on the front page of my website. They're the ones that wind up on the cover of my magazine. Because as we said at the outset, they're great stories to tell. I think that there's no such thing as a small integration project. I think the value it provides for any manufacturer, once you've made the decision that I can't do this myself, when you bring in a consultant expert on that, it's no different than going to the doctor or the dentist or the accountant. They have an expertise that you don't have that you need in order to be better at whatever it is you're going to want to do next. So I think that there's no such thing as a small story. There's no such thing as a small integration project. I think that it's a great opportunity to hold up your people as much as anything else. When I've talked to executives at integration companies, they want to talk about how great their people are. They want to talk about how dedicated, how industry savvy those people are. And from my perspective, that goes back to my community newspaper days. The best stories are about people.
I think, too, there's a very practical benefit from contributing to publications like yours, and that is you're developing some credibility within the industry. And when your business person shows up to make that pitch, when the next RFP comes out, there is a little bit of cachet that goes along with that. And so you can look at it as a business decision, right? It's a way to generate leads. Maybe at the best case scenario, you get a lead out of it, but just building that reputation and credibility amongst the industry is gold.
I think that's great. And I've always seen it in the reverse, in that if I don't know that I need an integrator and I read a story about an integrator, I'm likely to call him up and say, hey, can you help me? And if you can't, can you point me to somebody who can? I also think that it's so important for the industry to be seen as supporting one another. And I think that the value of CSIA as a whole is that you have people who are in the same room with one another who do similar things and may be competing for that same RFP, but they're also willing to lift one another up because all the boats will rise that way. I think there's enough business available to everybody so that you get value out of being part of the association. You get value out of seeing what your friendly competitors are doing, as well as you get an opportunity to be seen as a leader in the industry and somebody who is a solution provider and a problem solver. And those kinds of reputations are golden within any industry.
So let's switch gears again completely and talk a little bit more about you personally. If you look back on...
That won't take long.
If you look back on your career, is there a particular mistake that you can point to and say, what I learned from that really was a game changer?
I was pondering this thought this week. There's an old expression in our business: doctors bury their mistakes, ours get printed. And I think that that's fundamentally true. I have been on the front end of some really bad typos over time. And that's one of those things. I think there are moments where you think you're more important than you are. And when those kinds of things come back and bop you in the head, you hopefully learn from them and hopefully realize that, my role is not to lead from that standpoint. My role is really to facilitate others being able to tell their stories. So my job, as I said at the outset, is to get out of the way of that process as much as possible. From time to time, you get in your own way, and that doesn't serve you at all well to begin with, but it doesn't serve our overall goal either. It fortunately hasn't happened a lot, and it hasn't been a major impediment, but it's something that you keep in the back of your mind is the reader at the end of the day and the people that you're trying to tell their stories, both are counting on you to get it right and to get it fair and to get it tangible, something that they can really use. The lessons are that in print in particular, it's there forever. But I also think that one of the things I love about my job is that I'm one of the very few people who gets to sign his name to his work. So there's a tremendous amount of responsibility in that. There's a tremendous amount of fun in that too. And I've enjoyed both aspects of that. But they also know who to call when it goes wrong.
Right. So I have a journalism degree as well and started in first a little bit in consumer press and then moved to trade press for a while. And there was just such a thrill to sing my byline. Oh my goodness. It was so exciting. And then, we pretty much toil in anonymity. At least I feel like I do. Maybe you have more direct interaction with the readers, but those occasions where a reader or a listener comes up to me and says, good job, or thanks for producing that work. Oh my goodness, my heart swells because it's just so rewarding.
It doesn't happen all that often, frankly, is you get more of the complaints. And I take those all with a grain of salt. At least somebody cared enough, not just to read it, but to respond to it. And I respect that part of the process too. When people say, what do you do for a living? I tell them I'm an editor. They go, oh, that's not something you hear every day. I've had a ball. I've had the best time. It's fortunate that I'm able to do this because I don't do anything else particularly well, but I've had a great time. I've had just a tremendous time in this career. And in trade publishing in particular, I've gotten to see the world, which has given me an entirely different perspective on what goes on out there. And I tend to focus on the commonalities as opposed to the differences. I have never been to a place where I couldn't relate to the people in a very direct way because they're all trying to do the same thing we're all trying to do, which is have a good life, be well thought of in their communities, and leave something a little better for the next person.
I know you just mentioned that you can't do anything else besides write. I'm paraphrasing, right? Or the words to that effect. But if you had to choose a completely different career, what would you choose?
I would have been center fielder for the Chicago White Sox. I don't know. In my wild misspent youth, I did play-by-play on the radio for football and basketball. Enjoyed that immensely, but I didn't see it as necessarily as a long-term career goal because I had a lot of people who mentored me along the way. And I had a radio advisor in high school who said, listen, your voice probably isn't good enough for radio, but I've been hearing about the things you've been reading on the air and people saying, who's writing Bob's stuff? And they said, well, Bob is. I said, well, if you're looking to look at a career in communications, that maybe is the path you ought to go. So I was fortunate enough to be mentored very early on. I was working professionally at 17 before I was supposed to be. I was hired while I was still a senior in high school by the local newspaper to be sports editor. I was enormously blessed at every step along the way to have people who said, we'll take a chance on this guy and see what he can do. So I am a firm believer that luck is the intersection of opportunity and experience. And I have been well prepared along the way to have great experience. And I've been fortunate enough to hook up with some really terrific people in our industry.
Well, having said that, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, just getting started, what advice would you give him?
I've been asked this a few times and I keep coming back to the same answer. For young people, it's a very difficult concept. But as I've gone along further and further in my career, it's two words: be patient. I think that there is a rush to get everything yesterday and achieve it all immediately and then just take it from there. I've taken every job that I've ever had with the idea it was going to be the last thing I was ever going to do. But I was always prepared to see what else was out there and prepare myself for the opportunity to do something else. For me, a great guidepost is I'm doing this now. I'm content doing this now, but maybe there's something else out there. So if you keep your eyes open and you're patient, the right opportunity is going to come along. It certainly has at Machine Design. I've been enormously blessed to come on with these people in this organization. It's been a really tremendous experience for me personally and professionally.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Talking Industrial Automation. If you are interested in learning more about machine design or power and motion, you can find them at www.machinedesign.com and www.powermotiontech.com, respectively. If you are a CSIA member and want to learn more about the opportunities to work with trade publications such as Bob's, visit www.controlsys.org and click on the Media tab in the top nav. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Bob, for joining me today.
My pleasure, Lisa. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also help others find us by leaving a 5-star review and sharing your favorite episodes with colleagues. Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Thanks also to bensound.com and Wistia for the music bumpers. Until next time.